On October 4th, 1988, 5-year-old Lauren Jackson vanished from the Park Springs apartment complex in Spring City, Pennsylvania. In the 37 years since that evening, Lauren has never been found. Despite an exhaustive initial search involving hundreds of volunteers, bloodhounds, helicopters, and professional trackers, no concrete answers have emerged about what happened to the little girl who disappeared within feet of her front door. Lauren was born on September 26, 1983, facing incredible odds right from the start. Born with a mixture of severe medical conditions, she struggled with deformed feet known as club foot, a double hernia, cleft palate, eye muscle problems, hip dysplasia, and hydrocephalus. Doctors told Lauren's parents that there was little to no hope for their child's survival, but Lauren proved to be a fighter. At just 1 month old, she was fitted with leg casts to help straighten her deformed feet. Because infants grow rapidly, these casts required weekly changes, subjecting the tiny baby to regular hospital visits. As she learned to walk, she wore metal braces on her legs to support her developing bones. She also showed issues with her vision early on, requiring glasses from what was described as an unusually young age. She underwent surgery to repair her cleft palate and another operation for her double hernia, leaving small surgical scars on her lower abdomen and on the roof of her mouth. Additional eye surgeries were planned but never performed as Lauren disappeared before they could take place. By age 5, Lauren's health had improved dramatically, though she still required orthopedic shoes, which caused one foot to be slightly larger than the other, affecting the way she walked. Despite her medical challenges, she had become a happy, energetic child. Friends and family often described how she loved singing and dancing around the living room while watching TV. She was particularly fond of the California Raisins, a popular cartoon singing group from the 1980s, which would actually become a key detail in the investigation. Approximately 32 days before Lauren's disappearance, her mother, Christine, was arrested after attempting to obtain medication through fraudulent means. When her prescription supply ran out and she was unable to get more through legitimate channels, she called a pharmacy and impersonated a doctor to order more. The pharmacist, suspicious of the call, contacted the physician's office to verify the prescription. When it was confirmed that the call was not from an actual doctor, police were notified. Christine was subsequently arrested when she arrived at the pharmacy to pick up the medication. This arrest would have significant repercussions for how the public viewed Christine after Lauren disappeared. Initially dismissed by Christine as stupid charges, the arrest became front-page news once her daughter went missing. The publicity dramatically shifted public opinion, transforming community support into suspicion. Lauren's father, Mickey, lived separately in Philadelphia, about 30 miles from Spring City, and maintained regular visitation with his daughter. By all accounts, Mickey adored his daughter. He described his Saturday visits with her as, quote, the best part of his week, and told investigators that Lauren was always happy to see him. Years later, he would tell reporters the following: "She was just a nice kid. She was the nicest kid you'll ever meet. I said it to my mother one time. What did I do to deserve her? She was just a sweet kid." However, Mickey harbored serious concerns about Lauren's living situation with Christine. He characterized the Park Springs complex as a hotbed of drug activity and worried about his daughter growing up in that environment. In the months leading up to Lauren's disappearance, Mickey had discussed seeking full custody of Lauren, though he had not yet filed any legal paperwork. The relationship between Mickey and Christine was described as extremely volatile. Mickey claimed he had ended the relationship and kicked Christine out before their separation, while Christine alleged that she left because Mickey was abusive, claims he vehemently denied. Despite their mutual hostility, even Christine acknowledged that Mickey had never been abusive toward Lauren and genuinely loved his daughter. He also admitted to his own struggles with alcohol addiction, a fact that added complexity to all potential custody battles. October 4th, 1988 began like any other Tuesday. For 5-year-old Lauren, it marked exactly 1 week since her 5th birthday. The sun would set that evening around 6:45 p.m., a time when parents in the Park Springs apartment complex typically allowed their children to play outdoors under the watchful eyes of neighbors and the ambient light from apartment windows. One noteworthy detail that evening was that Christine made a decision that seemed out of the routine at the time. She decided that she'd take Lauren and her 12-year-old half-sister Diana out for dinner. The trio left their apartment sometime between 6 o'clock and 6:30 p.m., though the exact departure time was never specified in public reports. The trio headed to a local fast food restaurant, and everything that occurred during that outing seemed pretty normal. Christine, Lauren, and Diana ate their meal, chatted, and prepared to return home. The family arrived back at the apartment complex around 7:15 p.m., and almost immediately, Lauren asked her mother for permission to go outside and play with the other kids. By this time, the sun had set, but there was some illumination from the street lamps. The presence of other children set Christine's mind at ease, and she allowed her daughter to go out. Little did she know that this decision would haunt her for the rest of her life. Lauren exited the apartment and headed into the common areas of the complex where other children were playing. She was wearing a white long-sleeve pullover shirt featuring a California raisin character printed on both the front and back, black knit pants that had a stain on the back, white socks, and white Reebok sneakers with pink laces. Meanwhile, Diana had other plans for the evening. She had secured a babysitting job with the neighbors in the complex and was preparing to go to their apartment to watch their children. Lauren, who adored her big sister, asked if she could come along, but she declined. Lauren, disappointed but understanding, went outside to find other people to play with. Christine, now alone in the apartment with Diana having left for her babysitting job, turned her attention to household tasks. Around 7:30 p.m., approximately 15 minutes after they had returned home, Christine went to the window and looked outside to check on Lauren's whereabouts. She saw her playing approximately 30 yards away in front of an adjacent building, well within the complex boundaries. She appeared safe and happy. She was on the ground digging in the dirt with a 6-year-old neighborhood boy. This child was the son of Lisa Cunningham, another resident of the complex. From Christine's vantage point at the window, everything appeared normal and safe. At some point between 7:30 and 7:35 p.m., Lisa called her son back inside their apartment. The two were preparing to go shopping, and she needed him to come in, get cleaned up, and get ready for the outing. The little boy said goodbye to Lauren and headed into his building, leaving Lauren playing alone in the dirt. After just a few minutes, Lisa and her son exited their apartment to leave, and they noticed that Lauren was no longer playing in the area. Around 7:50 p.m., approximately 20 minutes after Christine had last looked out and seen Lauren playing with the Cunningham boy, she went to the window again to check on her daughter. This time, Lauren was nowhere to be seen. Initially, this absence would not have triggered immediate panic. The Park Springs apartment complex was sprawling, comprising 151 units spread across multiple buildings. Children playing in such an environment routinely moved from one location to another. Christine's first assumption was that Lauren had simply moved to a different part of the complex. However, as the minutes continued to tick by without Lauren returning to the apartment or coming into view, Christine's concern began to grow. At some point, she decided she needed to go outside and look for Lauren more actively. What followed was an hour and 15 minutes of increasingly desperate searching. Christine left her apartment and began walking through the Park Springs complex, calling Lauren's name, checking the various areas where children typically played, and asking neighbors if they had seen her daughter. The complex was large enough that this search took considerable time. With each passing minute, Christine's anxiety escalated until she reached full-blown panic, realizing that something had happened to her daughter. At 9:15 p.m., more than 2 hours after Christine had last seen her daughter playing in the dirt, Christine made a call to the police and reported that her 5-year-old daughter was missing. Within minutes of the call, police officers arrived at the complex. The search had mobilized hundreds of community volunteers and included professional tracking teams, bloodhounds, helicopters, and more. The initial search radius covered approximately 8 square miles of Chester County's still rural landscape. Teams checked every garage, car, dumpster, and outbuilding, and searched wooded areas, marshlands, and open fields. One of the most challenging aspects of the search involved the abandoned Pennhurst State Hospital, which fell within the search perimeter. The massive former institution had been shut down for several years, leaving behind a large campus of deteriorating buildings. Search teams had to navigate not only the dangerous crumbling structures above ground, but also an extensive network of underground tunnels that connected the buildings. These passages were dark, damp, and in advanced states of decay, making them treacherous for searchers. Ultimately, neither the bloodhounds nor the volunteers found anything. Over the course of the investigation, dive teams dragged nearly 20 ponds in the surrounding area, searching for any sign that Lauren might have fallen into water. However, every search came up empty. 2 days after Lauren's disappearance, investigators found a small footprint along Park Springs Boulevard near a public payphone, approximately 50 yards from Lauren's apartment. The footprint was believed to belong to Lauren, providing the first clue about her possible route away from the complex. Bloodhounds were used to trail this print and eventually led investigators to the Vincent Motel, which was about 1 mile away from the apartment complex. But unfortunately, the dogs could not detect Lauren's scent inside the motel and could not continue beyond the parking lot. The most agreed upon explanation was that Lauren had been placed into a vehicle at that location. What made this evidence particularly significant and puzzling was the nature of the trail itself. The dogs followed a relatively direct path from the apartments to the motel, not the meandering, erratic route that one would expect from a lost 5-year-old wandering aimlessly. The directness of the path suggested Lauren was either walking with someone she knew and trusted or was being led to a specific destination. As the physical search continued, detectives shifted their focus to interviews and background investigations. Following standard protocol in missing child cases, they began with family members. Christine told investigators she believed Lauren had been kidnapped. She insisted Lauren knew that she was not allowed to leave the apartment complex without adult supervision. The girl had once gotten in trouble for leaving the complex with a group of children who were walking to a nearby store, and Christine was confident her daughter had learned her lesson and wouldn't disobey again. She simply could not accept that Lauren would have wandered away on her own. Diana was devastated by her sister's disappearance and blamed herself for refusing to let Lauren go babysitting with her that evening. She reiterated what her mother had said about Lauren being shy around strangers and would not have willingly gone with someone she didn't know. From the very beginning, Mickey, Lauren's father, held a different view. He firmly believed Christine was involved in the disappearance, though not necessarily in a criminal way. Mickey's theory was that Christine, overwhelmed by the challenges of single motherhood and facing a potential custody battle she might lose, gave Lauren away to ensure he couldn't gain custody. However, Mickey could offer no evidence to support his theory. It remained purely speculative, based on his perception of Christine's character and motivations. For 2 months, the investigation proceeded with the assumption that a stranger had abducted Lauren. Then, in December 1988, a witness came forward with information that dramatically shifted the focus of the investigation. The woman told police that on the evening of October 4th, around 7 p.m., she had been in the parking lot of the Jamesway Mall when she witnessed a disturbing scene. She claimed to have seen a woman matching Christine's description forcing a child matching Lauren's description into the back of a car. According to the witness, the little girl was screaming while the woman appeared to be handing the child over to an elderly couple in the parked vehicle. James Coate, who was with the East Vincent Police Department at the time, found this account compelling. The following day, James drove to Christine's apartment unannounced, and the witness and FBI agents watched from across the street. When Christine emerged, the witness identified her, claiming to be 100% positive that this was the woman she had seen at the mall. James believed he had enough for an arrest. However, the Chester County District Attorney's Office disagreed and dissuaded him from making an arrest, citing serious problems with the witness account. The witness insisted the mall incident occurred at 7 p.m. However, multiple independent witnesses, including the Cunningham family and other neighbors, confirmed seeing Lauren playing at the apartment complex at 7:30 p.m., a full 30 minutes after the alleged mall incident. Unless Lauren could be in 2 places at once, the witness's timeline was impossible. Additionally, the witness waited more than 2 months before coming forward with this supposedly traumatic information. When someone witnesses a child being forced into a car while screaming in protest, the typical response is to immediately call the police or intervene. A delay of over 60 days raised serious questions about the witness's motivations and the reliability of her memory. By December 1988, Christine's face had been extensively publicized due to not only her daughter's disappearance, but also for her arrest on drug charges in early November. During this time, Christine had been featured in numerous newspapers and interviews by reporters. When the witness identified her 2 months after the alleged incident, it was impossible to determine whether she was recognizing Christine from the supposed October 4th encounter or simply recognizing her from media coverage. Furthermore, the witness claimed Christine was handing Lauren to an elderly couple, but provided no description of the vehicle, license plate, or any other identifying details that could be investigated. Despite these problems, the witness statement had a profound impact on the investigation's direction and on public perception of Christine's involvement. In the early 1990s, the question of whether Christine played a role in her daughter's disappearance was serious enough to warrant presentation to a grand jury. This 4-month investigation represented the most intensive examination of potential parental involvement in the case. Grand jury proceedings are conducted in secret to protect the integrity of investigations and the reputations of potentially innocent people under scrutiny. In the legal system, a grand jury's decision not to indict typically indicates that prosecutors lacked sufficient evidence to establish probable cause that a crime had been committed. After 4 months of investigation and deliberation, the grand jury declined to indict Christine. However, this decision did little to quell public speculation, particularly among those who had been influenced by media coverage of Christine's substance problems and the controversial witness statement. Over 37 years, investigators, family members, and true crime enthusiasts have proposed numerous theories to explain Lauren's disappearance. The most prominent theory remains abduction, which is the official working theory held by the East Vincent Police Department. Supporting this theory is the bloodhound trail ending at the motel, which suggests Lauren was placed in a vehicle. Additionally, the lack of physical evidence or witnesses seeing Lauren leave with a family member supports stranger involvement. An 11-year-old witness who claimed to see a white male forcing Lauren into a vehicle also provided some support. However, this account was never substantiated. The proximity to Route 724 would have also provided easy access for someone unfamiliar with the area to quickly leave the region. But this theory does have its weaknesses. No one at the apartment complex reported seeing suspicious strangers in the area. Multiple witnesses saw Lauren within 100 feet of her front door, meaning an abduction would have had to occur in a very brief window. Another theory posits that Lauren, despite her mother's certainty that she wouldn't leave the complex, was distracted by something and wandered toward the road, eventually becoming lost. 5-year-old children don't always think logically and can be easily distracted. Something near the road could have caught her attention. Young children can travel surprising distances in short periods when motivated, and the footprint found along Park Springs Boulevard suggests she did walk in that direction. Some have speculated that Lauren was accidentally struck by a vehicle on the route, and the driver, in a panic, took her body to avoid prosecution. The bloodhound trail led to a road with vehicle traffic, and hit-and-run accidents do occur, with panicked drivers known to have concealed their involvement. However, this theory lacks supporting evidence. No physical evidence such as blood, broken glass, plastic fragments, or skid marks was found on the roadway despite thorough searches. An intriguing but unconfirmed theory suggests that members of Christine's extended family, concerned about substance activity in the Park Springs complex and Lauren's living conditions, took the child without Christine's knowledge to rescue her from an unsuitable environment. Unverified rumors circulated that out-of-state members of Christine's family were staying at the Vincent Motel when Lauren disappeared, which would explain why the bloodhound trail led to that specific location. This would also explain why Lauren went willingly, as she would have recognized family members. Walking from the complex to the motel rather than driving would avoid the risk of Christine recognizing their vehicle, though investigators were never able to confirm that Christine's family members were actually staying at the motel. If family members were concerned about the living conditions, why would they take only Lauren and leave 12-year-old Diana in the same environment? This would require an agreement of silence lasting 37 years, with family members never revealing what happened to Lauren. Some have even suggested that Mickey may have been responsible for abducting Lauren. The family court system's bias toward mothers in 1988 could have convinced him that he couldn't win custody through legal channels, so he took matters into his own hands. Mickey had openly discussed seeking full custody and expressed concerns about Lauren's living conditions. This theory would explain why Diana was left behind, as Mickey wasn't her biological father. But after Mickey was investigated as a suspect and cleared by officials, this theory began to fall apart. He has remained publicly committed to finding Lauren for nearly 4 decades, traveling to Florida to investigate tips and speaking to the media regularly. If Mickey had taken Lauren, he would have needed to completely conceal her identity and whereabouts for decades. In 2011, Christine passed away. Her obituary, published in Philadelphia area newspapers, listed Diana as her surviving child, but made no mention of Lauren. This omission struck many as significant, though its meaning remains open to interpretation. As for Mickey, he has never stopped looking for answers. In a 2022 interview, he told CBS News that he was never going to give up on the search. Now, in his later years, he faces the possibility that he may never know what happened to his daughter. Yet he continues to hope that someone, somewhere, knows something that could finally solve this mystery. From 1976 to 1977, at least 4 children were abducted and held captive for days or weeks before being brutally murdered. The killer did not murder impulsively. Instead, they maintained a secure environment where children could be kept alive, fed, bathed, and cared for. This led to the killer earning the moniker of the babysitter. On the afternoon of Sunday, February 15th, 1976, Mark Stebbins attended an American Legion Hall in Ferndale, Michigan to watch movies with friends. Around 1:30 p.m., Mark told his friends he was leaving to go home to watch television, but he never arrived home. He was last seen walking away from the hall wearing a distinctive blue parka with a hood, blue jeans, and boots. His mother, who worked at 2 jobs to support the family, reported him missing when he failed to return for dinner. Initially, police treated the disappearance as a runaway case. 4 days later, on February 19th, at approximately 11:45 a.m., a local businessman named Mark Bodeckheimer left his office building in Southfield, located at 10 Mile and Greenfield Roads. As he walked through the parking lot, he noticed a shape lying atop a snowbank in the northeast corner of the lot. At first, he mistook it for a mannequin dressed in blue clothing. As he drew closer, he realized that it was the body of Mark Stebbins. The condition of the body provided the first glimpse into the killer's unusual psychology. Mark was laid out neatly, fully clothed in the same outfit he had been wearing when abducted. However, the clothes were not in the condition one would expect after 4 days of captivity. They were clean, dry, and appeared to have been freshly laundered and pressed. The autopsy revealed that Mark had been suffocated and his body showed signs of sexual assault with a foreign object. Additionally, there were rope burns on his wrists and ankles, indicating he had been bound during his captivity. 2 small lacerations were found on the rear of his head, suggesting he may have been struck or subdued initially. After 10 months had passed without a linked incident, the local community began to believe that the danger had passed for good. That silence was broken days before Christmas. On the evening of December 22nd, 1976, Jill Robinson had an argument with her mother regarding dinner preparations. Upset, she packed a small backpack with clothing and a blanket, took her bicycle, and left her home in Royal Oak. Her father, Thomas, called the police at 11:30 p.m. that night to report her missing. The next day, her bicycle was discovered behind a hobby store on Woodward Avenue, a major thoroughfare in the area. Witnesses later reported seeing Jill at a nearby donut shop between 6 o'clock and 7 a.m. the morning after she left home, suggesting she had survived the night on her own before encountering her killer. She remained missing for 3 more days. On the morning of December 26th, her body was discovered along the shoulder of Interstate 75 near Big Beaver Road in Troy. Jill's murder deviated significantly from the other cases in its method of execution. While the other victims were suffocated, Jill was killed by a shotgun blast to the face. She was found fully clothed, wearing her blue backpack and lying on her back. The autopsy confirmed she had been fed and cared for during her captivity, which lasted at least 3 days. Unlike Mark Stebbins, Jill showed no ligature marks on her wrists or ankles, suggesting she was not bound. There were also no signs of sexual assault. This lack of assault and restraint has fueled speculation that Jill may have been a failed abduction. Perhaps she was too rebellious, or her age and gender did not fit the killer's specific profile, leading to her execution by firearm rather than the more personal method of suffocation used in the other instances. Just a week after Jill was found, the terror escalated. On Sunday, January 2nd, 1977, 10-year-old Christine Mahalik left her home in Berkeley to buy a magazine at a 7-Eleven store at 12 Mile Road in Oakshire. She was seen at the store purchasing the magazine, but vanished on the short walk back home. Christine remained missing for 19 days, the longest period of captivity for any of the known victims. During this time, the community was in a state of high alert. Parents began driving their children to school, and unsupervised play vanished from the streets of Oakland County. On January 21st, a mail carrier named Jerry Wozni was driving his route in the affluent Franklin Village. He spotted what looked like a blue bundle in a snowbank on the side of Bruce Road, a quiet dead-end street. This bundle was Christine's body. She was found fully clothed in the same outfit she had been wearing 19 days earlier. Like the others, her body was clean. Her eyes had been closed and her arms were folded across her chest. She lay within sight of nearby homes, yet no one had seen the body being dropped off. The autopsy stated that she had been suffocated to death. Despite the 2-week captivity, there were no signs of long-term physical abuse, malnutrition, or torture. She had been fed and maintained. However, her body was frozen solid, which delayed the autopsy until the following day. There was no evidence of sexual assault, aligning her case more with Jill Robinson's, but linking her to Mark Stebbins through the method of death and the clean presentation. The third victim was named Timothy King. The abduction of Timothy is perhaps the most heartbreaking and forensically significant of the 4 cases. By March 1977, Oakland County was in a state of siege. A massive task force had been assembled, and everyone was well aware of the babysitter moniker. On the evening of Wednesday, March 16th, Timothy asked his older sister for 30 cents to buy candy. He grabbed his skateboard and left his home in Birmingham to skate to the Hunter Maple Pharmacy, located just a few blocks away on heavily trafficked Woodward Avenue. He was a well-liked athletic boy who played football and was described as street smart. He arrived at the pharmacy, bought his candy, and was seen by a clerk leaving through the rear exit, which led into a dark parking lot. A witness in the parking lot later reported seeing a boy matching Timothy's description talking to a man standing next to a vehicle. The witness described the man as a white male, possibly wearing a leather jacket, and the car as a blue AMC Gremlin with a white stripe on the side. This sighting would become the most critical lead in the investigation, generating thousands of tips about blue gremlins. When the boy failed to return home by 9 p.m., his parents Barry and Marion knew something was wrong. They found the door ajar, but no sign of their son. The police were notified immediately. Unlike in the Stebbins case, the response was instantaneous. A massive dragnet was launched involving hundreds of officers and volunteers. In the days that followed, Barry made an agonizing televised plea to the abductor. Fighting back tears, he begged for his son's life, promising that if Timothy was released, no questions would be asked. In an attempt to humanize his son to the captor, he mentioned that Timothy was a good boy whose favorite food was Kentucky Fried Chicken. Marion penned a letter in the Detroit News expressing her hope to serve him that meal again soon. The child was missing for 6 days total. On the evening of March 22nd, 2 teenagers driving along Jill Road in Livonia, a semi-rural area in neighboring Wayne County, spotted a body in a shallow ditch, which was later confirmed to be Timothy. He was found fully clothed, his skateboard placed neatly beside him. His clothes, like Mark Stebbins, had been freshly pressed. His fingernails were manicured, and he was described as, quote, clinically clean. The autopsy revealed that Timothy had been suffocated and assaulted with a foreign object, but an examination of his stomach contents revealed that his last meal, eaten shortly before his death, was fried chicken. The killer had been watching the news. He had heard the father's plea, acquired the boy's favorite food, fed it to him, and then killed him. This act demonstrated a terrifying level of control and engagement with the investigation. Dr. Werner Spitz, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, noted that the suffocation and assault had occurred approximately 6 hours before the body was found. The discovery of Timothy King marked the end of the known abduction sequence. For nearly 5 decades, the investigation has been marred by jurisdictional disputes, lost evidence, and allegations of high-level cover-ups. Yet, one figure remains central to the most credible theories of the crime: Christopher Brian Busch. A wealthy, convicted pedophile with deep ties to several Michigan elites, Busch fits the forensic and psychological profile of the killer more closely than any other suspect. In 1978, the disturbing evidence found in his bedroom and the DNA breakthrough in 2012 collectively paint a picture of a predator who was likely protected by his connections and privilege until he became a liability. Christopher was born into the upper echelons of Detroit society. He was the son of H. Lee Busch, the chief financial officer of General Motors, a position of immense power and influence in 1970s Michigan. Raised in Bloomfield Township, an affluent area known as the Village, Busch enjoyed a life of privilege, attending elite schools, including a boarding school in Switzerland. Despite his family's standing, Busch's behavior was deeply disturbed. By the mid-1970s, he was a known with a distinct preference for boys. He drove a blue 1974 Chevrolet Vega with a white stripe, a vehicle that bore a striking resemblance to the blue AMC Gremlin with a white stripe reported by witnesses at the abduction of Timothy King. In January 1977, right in the middle of the babysitter killing spree, Busch was facing criminal conduct charges in 4 different Michigan counties, including Midland, Montmorency, Genesee, and Oakland. These charges stemmed from the assault of multiple young boys. Under normal circumstances, facing 4 concurrent sex crime indictments would result in significant jail time and high bail. However, Busch's treatment by the legal system was highly anomalous. While his co-conspirator in these crimes, Gregory Green, was held on a $75,000 bond and eventually sentenced to life in prison, Busch's bond was inexplicably reduced to just $1,000, allowing him to walk free. He ultimately received only probation for his crimes. This leniency allowed a serial predator to remain on the streets during the exact window when Christine and Timothy were abducted and murdered. The disparity between the treatment of Green and Busch speaks to the protective shield that surrounded Busch due to his family's wealth and power. The investigation into Busch intensified due to a tip from an informant. In early 1977, Green, facing a life sentence and likely looking for leverage, told investigators that Busch was responsible for the babysitter killings. Green claimed that Busch had confessed to killing Mark Stebbins, the first victim. He provided details that aligned with the geography of the crimes, noting that Busch liked to hunt for victims in Ferndale, Royal Oak, and Berkeley, the exact locations where the first 3 victims were taken. Despite this damning accusation from a known associate, both Green and Busch were given polygraph tests. The results were controversial. Initial examiners claimed they passed, while later reviews by independent experts suggested Busch had failed or that the results were inconclusive. The polygraph controversy has become one of the most contested aspects of the case, with victim families arguing that Busch's suspected failure was deliberately buried to protect him. Relying on the past polygraph, law enforcement cleared Busch as a primary suspect in the murders, a decision that would haunt the case for decades. As mentioned, the killing stopped abruptly in March 1977. 20 months later, on November 20th, 1978, Christopher Busch was found dead in his bedroom at his parents' Bloomfield Township home. The death was ruled a suicide. Busch had shot himself with a .22 caliber rifle. However, the circumstances of the incident were highly suspicious. Autopsy reports revealed there was no gunshot residue found on Busch's hands, a forensic anomaly for a self-inflicted gunshot wound using a rifle. Additionally, he was found tucked into bed wrapped in blankets, a position that some investigators found inconsistent with a violent suicide involving a fatal rifle shot. Furthermore, the death occurred just as the task force responsible for the case was preparing to disband. To this day, many researchers and family members question whether Busch's death was truly a suicide or whether he was silenced to prevent revelations about his family connections and the ring's broader operations. When police raided his room following the incident, they discovered a trove of evidence that linked him physically and psychologically to the murders. Pinned to the wall of his bedroom was a hand-drawn pencil sketch of a screaming boy. The boy in the drawing bore a terrifying resemblance to Mark Stebbins. The child in the sketch was depicted with a haircut identical to Stebbins and, most damningly, was wearing a hooded parka. Stebbins was abducted wearing a similar blue hooded parka on February 15, 1976. The drawing captured the raw terror of a child with his mouth open in what appeared to be an anguished scream. Investigators believe this image was a sort of trophy, either drawn in real time or from memory, for the killer to relive the crime. Since Bush had no known artistic talent, it is suspected the sketch may have been drawn by an accomplice or another member of the ring. Police also found a length of rope in Bush's closet, which was tied in specific ligature knots that matched the burn marks found on Stebbins' wrists and ankles. The presence of this rope, kept in Bush's private space years after the murders, suggested obsessive behavior consistent with a predator who relived his crimes through physical souvenirs. Shotgun shells were found in the room as well. While they were never ballistically matched to the weapon that killed Jill Robinson, who was shot in the face with a shotgun, the presence of the ammunition in the room of a suspect linked to the murder was highly significant. On another note, Bush was known to be obsessive about cleanliness, a trait that aligns perfectly with the killer's profile of washing the victims' bodies and clothes. Investigators noted that his bedroom was meticulously organized, and he was known to change clothes frequently and shower multiple times daily. This obsessive hygiene habit, combined with his access to residential facilities where children could be bathed and clothed before disposal, made Bush a compelling suspect. Tragically, much of this physical evidence, including the bloody ropes, went missing from police storage in the years following the investigation, preventing modern DNA testing on the ligatures themselves. This loss of evidence, whether through incompetence or deliberate removal, has been cited by victim families as further proof of institutional malfeasance and cover-up. For over 30 years, the connection between Bush and the victims remained circumstantial. That changed in 2012, when advanced DNA technology opened new investigative possibilities. DNA testing was performed on a single hair found on the clothing of Christine, the third victim, who had been held for 19 days before her body was discovered in Franklin Village. The DNA did not match Bush himself, but it was a mitochondrial match to James Vincent Gunnels. Gunnels was not a random stranger. In 1976 and 1977, he was a teenager who was a known associate and victim of Christopher Bush. Gunnels admitted to being part of Bush's social circle and to being by him. He told investigators he had spent time in Bush's Blue Vega and at the Bush family's cottage, a property in northern Michigan that has long been suspected as a possible location where victims were held. This evidence was the smoking gun the families had waited for. It physically placed a member of Bush's inner circle in direct contact with one of the victims. While he denied involvement in the murder, claiming his hair could have been transferred via the car seat or a blanket, the implication was clear. The victims were in Bush's car or in a location where Bush and his associates congregated. However, despite this genetic evidence, Gunnels was never charged with murder in connection with the cases. Another disturbing layer of the mystery is its potential connection to a high-level pedophile ring operating on North Fox Island, a private island in Lake Michigan located in the Straits of Mackinac. North Fox Island was owned by Francis Sheldon, a wealthy philanthropist and oil heir whose family had substantial business interests. In the mid-1970s, Sheldon established a facility on the island called Brother Paul's Children's Mission, ostensibly a nature retreat and camp for underprivileged and troubled youth. In reality, the island was a hub for the production of illegal pornography and sexual exploitation. Boys were flown to the island on private planes, isolated from the mainland, and subjected to abuse. The operation was insulated from detection by Sheldon's extreme wealth, the island's geographical isolation, and what many have described as a cover-up. Sheldon maintained connections to powerful individuals in Michigan and nationally. When the North Fox Island ring was finally exposed in the late 1970s, shortly after the babysitter murders ceased, Sheldon fled the United States and eventually died in Europe, evading prosecution. The connection between the murders and the island is largely circumstantial but compelling in its logic. Christopher Bush, the primary suspect in the murders, was known to be part of Sheldon's circle. Investigators and family members have long theorized that the victims were not random targets of a lone predator, but were procured for the North Fox Island operation. Under this theory, children would be abducted locally, held at a secure location, fed and cared for, and then either transported to the island for exploitation, or if deemed unsuitable or too damaged to be used, discarded in high visibility areas as a taunting gesture toward law enforcement. The logic of this theory rests on the unusual signature of the killings. Most predatory serial killers who abduct victims for typically kills them quickly to avoid discovery. The fact that the killer held victims for extended periods, cared for them physically, and then returned their bodies clean and fully clothed suggests a person or persons for whom the murder was secondary to another purpose. Another interesting aspect of the case ties back to Timothy King. In the weeks following his murder, a mysterious letter arrived at the office of Dr. Bruce Danto, a Detroit psychiatrist known for his work with crime victims and perpetrators. The letter was signed only as Alan and claimed to be from the roommate of the killer, whom Alan referred to as Frank. In the letter, Alan detailed aspects of the killings that only the killer would know, demonstrating genuine insider knowledge of the crimes. Alan claimed that Frank was a Vietnam veteran motivated by a desire to get back at the rich people who had sent boys to war. Most significantly, Alan included a photograph of a boy who was not one of the 4 known victims, suggesting either the existence of additional victims or survivors whose cases had not been officially connected to the series. Alan offered to meet Danto at a local bar to provide additional evidence and to potentially negotiate terms, but the meeting never occurred. Alan never made contact again, and the letter has been the subject of intense speculation for decades. Some investigators have suggested that Alan was Christopher Bush or another accomplice, attempting to gauge whether prosecution was imminent and potentially seeking immunity. The reference to Frank has been interpreted as either a reference to Francis Sheldon or as a generic coded name for the killer. The Tribec Mountains in western Slovakia have become one of Europe's most intriguing mysteries, earning the nickname the Slovak Bermuda Triangle due to a series of documented disappearances spanning over a century. The mountains form a crystalline range located in the inner western Carpathians, positioned approximately 1 hour northwest of Bratislava. The range is 50 kilometers in length and approximately 18 to 20 kilometers in width, with its highest peak reaching over 2,700 feet above sea level. The range is bordered by several towns including Nitra, Zlat Moravce, Topolkani, and Partizanski. The range belongs to the Pony Tree Protected Landscape Area and features 36 marked hiking trails exceeding 200 kilometers in total length, with numerous caves, rifts, and chasms interspersed throughout the terrain. Medieval castle ruins dot the landscape, and ancient settlements of Celtic and Dacian tribes have left archaeological traces suggesting historical significance in gold mining and metalworking. Despite its relatively unimposing dimensions, the location has witnessed a series of unexplained vanishings spanning nearly a century. The earliest prominently documented disappearance involves a forest ranger identified in records as A. Samsely, a 47-year-old professional forester engaged in routine woodland surveying work. On November 22, 1929, Samsely ventured into the snow-covered Tribec forests for what should have been a standard day of work. Even with his experience with mountain terrain and forest conditions, he never returned from this particular expedition. The circumstances of his disappearance generated an immediate official response. Police conducted an intensive investigation that extended into the spring months following the winter when snow had finally receded, theoretically improving search conditions. Despite these organized efforts, Samselee's body was never recovered. Speculation regarding his fate has congregated around his side. Accounts emphasize that the forester maintained a solitary life, reportedly without a spouse or children, and lived in relative isolation. This isolation, according to some, could have created psychological vulnerability conducive to such actions. However, the theory remains entirely speculative, unsupported by definitive evidence. No note was discovered, no eyewitness accounts corroborated self-destructive intentions, and no body was ever located to provide physical confirmation. Precisely 1 year after Samselee's disappearance, the mountains claimed a second victim under strikingly similar winter conditions. During the winter season of 1930, an 18-year-old girl named Maria Svazarova was sent out by her mother on a seemingly routine errand. She was to travel between two adjacent villages carrying food provisions. The destination was said to be close by and should have been an easy journey for an able-bodied young adult. Maria never arrived at her destination. This triggered a substantial police search effort. Despite extensive searching, no trace of Maria was located, no body was recovered, no evidence of foul play was definitively identified, and no reasonable narrative emerged to account for her disappearance. 4 years after Maria's disappearance, records document the vanishing of Andrei Murgas, identified as a quarry laborer employed in the extraction industry near the mountain range. After completing a full day's work, Andrei initiated his return to his village, and it was on this journey home that he too would disappear. Aside from his work, there is very little information regarding Andrei, but the most extensively documented and disturbing case involves Walter Fischer, a shoe factory worker employed by the Bata Shoe Company in the town of Partizansky, located near the mountains. Fischer lived by a consistent weekly pattern. He worked Monday through Saturday at the factory, with Sundays reserved for visiting family members in another town. On one Sunday, sources specify January 24th, though documentation remains ambiguous, Fischer deviated from this established pattern by deciding to undertake a hiking expedition instead of visiting family. His intended destination was the Black Castle ruins, a location approximately 23 kilometers distant from his place of work. Reaching this destination and returning the same day would have required traversing nearly 50 kilometers of predominantly wooded terrain, which many people deemed unfeasible. As you're likely expecting, Fischer disappeared in the midst of his hike. No one at the factory took notice of his absence until later on. The corporation apparently assumed he had simply abandoned his employment or decided to depart. More disturbingly, his wife did not report him missing until approximately 4 weeks had elapsed. There seems to be no confirmed reasoning as to why she waited so long to report him missing, but some speculate that it involved fear related to political circumstances unfolding in Slovakia during March 1939. By March 14, 1939, Slovakia had declared independence from Czechoslovakia and positioned itself as a German client state, creating a period of acute political instability and potential danger to individuals, particularly those reporting to authorities during uncertain governmental transitions. On May 8, 1939, approximately 4 months following his disappearance, Fischer was discovered. He lay unconscious in a field near Zlatmoravce, a city situated approximately 35 kilometers from his point of origin and, critically, on the opposite side of the mountains from the Black Castle destination he had intended to reach. His face and body were covered with severe burns. He could not communicate coherently or provide reliable testimony regarding his 4-month absence. The burn injuries present one of the case's most puzzling elements. One explanation suggests that extended wilderness exposure resulted in severe sunburn accumulated across the 4-month period. Theoretically, in a forested environment where sun reflection from certain terrain could produce unusual exposure patterns, particularly at higher elevations, could cause more pronounced burns. Another theory suggests hypothermia-induced tissue damage, where extended cold exposure causes severe dermal injury and color changes resembling burns. It's also possible that they were caused by accidental contact with fire, potentially in a forest setting where Fischer might have maintained survival fires for warmth. Two less discussed but interesting explanations involve chemical exposure or intentional injury by other persons, potentially in a abduction and torture type scenario. He had evidently suffered severe trauma that substantially diminished his mental functioning. He spent the remainder of his life institutionalized in a mental health facility, never recovering sufficiently to provide testimony about his experience, and ultimately died in institutional care. Documentation regarding the official investigation appears to have been severely compromised by historical circumstances. The Fisher case occurred in early 1939 during the precise moment of Slovak political transition and immediately preceding the September 1939 German invasion of Poland, which initiated European-wide warfare and chaos. Records from this tumultuous period were subject to loss, destruction, German confiscation, and subsequent post-war archival disruption. Another notable disappearance involves the couple of Jan and Elena Balanovich in February 1966. Their vehicle was discovered parked approximately 5 kilometers from Jelinek, a village within the Tribec region positioned near a forest entrance. When found, the car's doors were open, suggesting either a hasty exit or that the vehicle had been opened subsequent to the couple's departure. No trace of the couple themselves was discovered despite organized police search and investigation efforts. This particular incident is another in this series that has very little in the way of public records. While skeptics tend to veer toward conventional causes to explain these disappearances, others tend to lean into the possibility of a shared aspect connecting the cases. They argue that the mountains constitute a legitimate geographic anomaly.